Hi guys, in this video I'm going to introduce functions in Microsoft Excel. If you haven't seen functions before, this will be a great introduction. Before we get into the video, go to excelvbaSQL.com. There's almost 25 hours of free Excel videos. It'll teach you everything you need to know from beginner level to the advanced level. Put your email in here and you could receive emails when free videos go up. Okay, let's get started. So, in a previous video, we went and we found every single function that's in Microsoft Excel, and we put it in a worksheet, and we listed it by category, and then function name and description. If you didn't watch that video, it's okay, but for those of you who did, here's that worksheet. And we saw that there's about 348 or 300 and something functions. I mean, there's about 350. So what we're going to do in this video, let me go to a new Microsoft Excel, is I'm going to introduce you to functions. And so in that video that we put the functions in a worksheet, we saw that there's 348. And we found those functions on the internet. We went to Google and we searched for Microsoft Excel functions. We found a website from Microsoft that listed all of them for us. Now, we could also find all those functions, all 350 of them, right in Excel. And that's what we're going to play around with right now. So this right here is called the formula bar. And you saw from a previous video that is on the website that we could write a formula like 1 plus 1. Or we could reference cells and things like this. Like if that cell has 2 in it and this cell has 6 in it, we could reference a cell by doing this. Equals, you put an equal sign and you put A1 plus A2 and you get 8. So that's the formula bar. But in the formula bar and in formulas that you can write in the formula bar, you can also use functions from Microsoft Excel. So this brings up a question: what is a function? Well, a function, and I mentioned this in a previous video briefly, but we're going to go into it deeper here. A function is just something that Microsoft Excel provides to you where you can write something like this, equals, and then the name of a function. Now we're going to look at a simple function called sum. So there's a function. Once I start writing, notice this box pops up, and this lists all the function. This lists a bunch of the functions that fall under whatever you're typing. So as I type, this box changes. But these are function names, and you can see the little fx here and the fx here. That stands for function. So Microsoft Excel is really good at exposing all the functions it has. So we'll look at a function called sum here, this sum. And a function has a couple components. One component is the name. So the name of this function is sum. So if I double click it, you'll see the name is sum. And when you write a function, you want to write the name of the function and then an open parentheses. Now what does the open parentheses do? Well, it allows you to pass in what's called parameters or arguments. I call them parameters. You could call them arguments, whatever you'd like. So I'm going to call them parameters. But the open parentheses is saying, here between the parentheses, you could pass in something to the function. Now let me explain what a function is now. So a function, you could think of it like a machine where it does something. A machine does something. It has some output. And a parameter is something that you can pass into the machine and it is going to output something. That's all a function is. You could think of it as like a black box. This black box, you put something in it, you close the box, and you take something out. You don't need to know how it does it or what's going on in the box. All you know is that it produces some output. That's all a function is. You could think of it like a machine or a black box that has an input and an output. And that's the generic way of thinking about functions. But it's real easy. Functions are real easy. Don't be put off by functions or scared or think they're difficult or anything. They're really easy. They have a function name, and then you put an open parentheses and you pass in a parameter. And a parameter is just the input. In that analogy that I was just using, like a black box that you put something in it, that would be a parameter. And parameters could be anything. They could be numbers, text, all kinds of stuff. And some functions don't even have parameters. So basically, you just call the function. And what do I mean call? I mean when you write this equal sign and then you put the name of the function, and then here if I put in a parameter, so notice that Excel sort of lists out what the parameter should be. In the sum function, it wants a number, so I could put in 34, and then you could keep listing numbers with the comma, so I'll put another number, 100, and I could go on and list more numbers. But I don't need to go on and on. Just for example's sake, I'll just sum two numbers. So this sum function, it adds the numbers separated by parentheses. So I could hit enter now, and as soon as I hit enter, Microsoft Excel calls the sum function with these parameters. Okay, so those are the couple of components that are necessary with a function. You need an equal sign so that when you press enter, Microsoft Excel will call the function, and you need a name of a function so that Microsoft Excel's it knows what function to call, and then you need an open parentheses, and if there are any parameters, you need to provide them here, and you could just follow the format down here. So if it has a comma, you put the first number, comma, second number, and then you do a close parentheses to say, okay, I'm done with the parameters if there were any, and then you hit enter. So once you hit enter, it sums up 34 and 100. Now this is very useful because if you have 10,000 rows here down in this worksheet, you can sum those numbers very easily, and let me show you how to do that. So apart from doing these commas, like number 1, comma number 2, you could do something like this. Let's say I have 34 here and 100 here. You could do something like this. You could go in between the parentheses and just highlight this range, and then you get A1 colon A2. This colon sort of connects the range A1 to A2, and if you hit enter, it gives you the same answer, 134. So the parameters can go in different ways, right? We just saw that we could put commas in between here like this, A1 comma A2. It works like that. Or when we do A1 colon A2, it does the same thing. It's easier to do the colon because you can just drag it. You don't need to write anything. Like if I wanted to drag this over here, now I have a bigger range, A1 to B2, and if I hit enter and I put something in here, now this sum formula is summing over this range. Okay, so that's the basics of a function. You know, it has a function name and it has parameters, and the parameters can vary. They can be ranges, they can be individual cells. Like I said before, there's some functions that don't take any parameters, and one of those functions that doesn't take any parameter is a function called today. So as soon as I start typing equals TO, it knows that I want a function, and it goes right down here to today, because that's the only function that begins, I believe, with TO. So if I put in today and I do open close parentheses and then I hit enter, it gives me the current date. So that's today's date. So that's an easy way to get today's date. But notice that I didn't need any parentheses here, or I didn't need any parameters. So like I said before, functions, you could think of them like a black box, and sometimes you need to provide some input, like we did with the sum function up here. Here's my input, this range of cells. Other times you don't need to provide input. Either way, when you call the function, and remember what I mean by call, use the equal sign and then you hit enter, that's going to call the function. Now let me just show you what happens if I do sum with no parameters. If I just do sum no parameters, I get an error here. It says the formula you type contains an error. And then it says for information about fixing common formula problems, click here to get assistance. This is important. It says to get assistance in entering a function, click the function wizard. And that's this thing here. And we're going to go over that in a second. And it also says if you're not trying to enter a formula, avoid using the equal sign, things like that. So look at this. It says if you are not trying to enter a formula, avoid using the equal sign or precede it with quotation marks. So look at if you do sum without parameters, it as soon as you put that equal sign, it's trying to call this function sum, and that's what I mean call. Microsoft Excel knows that this is a function, so that error popped up because it knows that sum is a function, but you're missing parameters, so it's going to cause an error. So that's critical that you understand that a function has some of them have parameters, and if you don't provide them, if you don't provide the input, then you're going to cause an error. Okay, so let me here's another way you could do a range. You could just select the whole column, A colon A. If you do A colon A, it just highlights the whole column, and you'll get 134 here. Similarly, if I wanted to select both columns, I could just select both columns, A colon B up here, and I'll get 234 again. Okay, so I think you have an understanding now of what a formula is, right? It's just a black box that you put some input in and you call the function and it gives you some output. And when I say it's a black box, you really don't know how it is getting to 234 because you know the data you passed in was everything in column A and column B. You don't know how it summed these cells. Did it go down this column and down that column? Or did it go across first and then across and then down and then across and down and across? You don't know how it summed it up, and that's what I mean. It's a black box. You don't really know what's going on behind the scenes with this sum function. All you know is that you pass in some input and you hit enter and you get an output. That's what makes Microsoft Excel super powerful. And what makes it really powerful is that there's 300 of these things where you don't need to know anything behind the scenes. You don't need to know how to do pretty complicated stuff because they provide you these functions. This is just one of them, but there's 300 more. They provide you these functions where you could just pass in something and you hit enter and you get your answer. You get what you want. And then like I said, just be aware that sometimes you don't need to pass in data, but the format stays the same. You need an equal sign, you need a name of a function, and you need an open parentheses and a close parentheses, and in between, if there are parameters, then you need to pass those in. Okay, so now here comes a couple more questions. So here's a question: how do you know what you need to pass in here to these functions? And if you're working with Excel, you're just going to figure it out by either asking your coworkers, or you could Google sum. You could Google Microsoft Excel sum function, and you'll get your answer. But sometimes you don't even know what function to use. So how do you know what function to use? Well, I would like to say, go to excelvbasequel.com, and what we're going to do is we're going to put up videos on, hundreds of these functions. You're gonna see videos on hundreds of these functions and exactly what they do, and we're going to use real data to show you how to use them. And we'll do that a little bit in a little bit in this video. But before we get to that, before I start teaching you about all these functions, I want to show you what Microsoft Excel provides to help you learn the functions and practice the functions and get to know what they do. So there's this on the next to the formula bar here. You have this insert function button, this FX. If you click that, if you left click that, you get this function wizard. Okay. And this is a great resource. Basically everything I said It's sort of everything I said about functions, about having those parameters, and it giving you an output. It sort of is summarized in this gray box here, because when you click that FX button, this function wizard, what pops up is the name of the function, which you could see here, sum, and then the title of this window is function arguments, and that allows you to select your parameters. So remember when you did an open parentheses, you did number 1 comma number 2. Well, in this gray box, it tells you, it allows you to select a number 1 and a number 2. So I could go to number 2 and I could select, watch that. Let me show you that again. You see this little icon here with the arrow and the cells. If you click this, well, first of all, you could type in a number here. So if you want to type in something, you could type in 100, and notice that comma 100 appears up here. And notice also that number 3 appears. So it allows you to keep entering more data. So here's number 4 now. If I click this, number 5 shows up. And this little icon here, if you don't want to type it in, you could click this, and then you could go over here, and you could again highlight stuff and click OK and click enter. And notice what happens. Here, it shows you what value you're passing in. So if you pass in column A colon, if you pass in as an input A colon A, what you're really passing in is 34 and then 100 and then a bunch of zeros. And that's basically what you have over here. You have 34, then 100, and all zeros down here. Same thing up here. If you pass in A colon B, you're passing in multiple columns, so it just gives you this array, these curly brackets here, a left curly bracket and then a bunch of dots, 3 dots, and a right curly bracket. It indicates that there's a big array being passed in. And if you pass in 100, then what you're passing in, indicated by this equal sign, is 100. Similarly, if I go down here in A4 and just click on B1, what I'm passing into this function is 100. And then if I click on B5 and I pass in A1 and A2, what I'm really passing in is 34 and 100. And down here, it tells you your answer already in this window. It tells you that the answer will be 702. And below this whole area where you can add your arguments or parameters, notice it says function arguments. But I call them parameters. You could call them either one, parameters or arguments. Both of them are the data that you're passing in to this function. Okay, and then what's this down here? Well, this is the description of the function. It says adds all the numbers in a range of cells. And that's what this function does. It adds all the numbers in this range. And you could separate your ranges by commas. And it even gives you more information. It says number 1, number 2, number 1 to 255 are numbers to sum. Logical values and text are ignored in cells included if typed as arguments. So it gives you a description of what the function does. And I mean, it's a ton of information. It's right here in Excel by clicking this button. And remember, we clicked the button when I had sum in the formula bar, but I'll show you what happens if we don't. And also down here, you get this formula result equals 702. So it tells you the result. Okay, so this is an incredible tool for you. If you're worried about Microsoft Excel and not knowing any of these functions, this will explain what every function does. In our case, we wrote equals sum, and then we passed in some arguments, and then we click this button here, and it shows us the arguments we passed in and the description of the function. And if I click OK, then here we go. It's the same as clicking enter, and there's our 702. Okay, so that's how we were able to get information about this sum function. So we know now that this sum function, if we go back to that window, it takes a bunch of numbers from 1 to 255. So you could put in 255 numbers up here, and it'll sum them up. If you try to put more than 255, you're going to get an error. But most times you won't need to do that. You won't be putting in 255 numbers. And then it says logical values and text are ignored. What is a logical value? So a logical value is just something like this. If you put a formula like equals 1 equals 1. So does 1 equal 1? And if you hit enter, this is a logical value, true. Okay? So what does it mean if you go to this sum function and it says logical values are ignored, but they're included if it's typed as an argument? So watch this. If I go over here in this cell and I put equals true, or equals this cell, D4. Now D4 has the value true in it. But if I do equals D4, if I do equals sum D4, then I get 0, right? Because that's what this sum is trying to tell you in this little statement down here. Logical values are ignored unless they're included as an argument. So if I include it as an argument, meaning right here, it's an argument, D4 is an argument, it's going to be summed up. And the way logical values work is true has a value of 0, whereas if I put 1 equals 9, that's going to be false. False has a value, let's see. Okay. So I see what it's saying. Okay, so here's what it really means. Sorry to have to explain this again, but if you type in true here, it's going to be ignored because if I'm summing D4, it's not an argument. A logical value needs to be typed in. That's what it means. So if I type in this, true, sum the value D4 and true, and if I hit enter, it's going to be 1. If I type it again, sum the value D4, true, and true, then you get the value 2. Now where are these coming from? Where is 2 coming from? It's coming from this true evaluates to the number 1 when you pass it in as an argument, and this true evaluates to the number 1 when you pass it in as an argument. This true, D4 has the value true, but it's not passed in as an argument. This is an argument that is a logical value. So when it says over here, logical values and text are ignored in cells. So you could see this right here, D4. This is a logical value in a cell, so it's going to be ignored. Okay? So that's why you only have 2 here, not 3. Even though I'm doing true, the value in D4 is true, so this should sum up to 3. But it's ignored because it says it right here. It says logical values are ignored in cells, but if you include them as arguments, then they will be summed up. So like I said before, if you're confused, what's going on is the value of this logical value true is equivalent to the number 1. So when you do sum true, it's the same as doing sum 1. It's the same as doing this 1, 1. It's the same thing. Okay, so true equals 1, and false, if I do false, equals 0. So if you do that, if you sum D4 true and false, then you get 1 because this is evaluating to 1 here, whereas this is evaluating to 0, and this is evaluating to 0 even though it says true in that cell, because remember of this line right here, logical values are ignored in cells. Okay, so that's a little bit of a tangent on true and false and logical values, but it's good to know. True evaluates to 1, false evaluates to 0. And we saw that you could click on this function, insert function button when you type in a formula, and you get tons of information. Okay, so now you're wondering, okay, fine, I know how to click this button, but what happens when I don't have a formula in here? What is this thing good for? Well, it's super powerful. we saw in this worksheet that, here's all the categories. Let me scroll up real quick. Here is every single category in Microsoft Excel. It starts with the adding category, and then here's all the functions in that category, and here's a description. So where does this come from? Well, it comes from here. This FX button, when you just click on it in a blank cell when there's nothing in the formula bar, you just click on that FX button. It's an insert function button, and it allows you to see all the categories that we just looked at in that worksheet. So there's a category here in this insert function. Let's see. That has, well, I don't see the adding category. Maybe that one is for a different, maybe it's not in this wizard, but it's still in Microsoft Excel. This insert function wizard allows you to see all those things that are in the worksheet. So if we go in this worksheet, let me close this, and we look at, let's see, date and time functions. Date. So date and time functions, this is the category name. If I go back to my insert function button, I could go to this category. It says you could search for a function. So if I search for date and I click OK, go, then look what it did. It found me a function. It says select a function. That all has to do with dates. And if I click on it, down here it says a description, and it shows you the parameters. So here's the name of the function, date, and the open parentheses says you pass in an argument that is the year, comma, then you pass in a month argument, then you pass in a day argument. And it says returns the number that represents the date in Microsoft Excel date time code. So this date function actually returns a number, and that's because Microsoft Excel stores dates as numbers. It starts at a certain year, I believe 1900, and it says, okay, 1900, that's going to be some number. And then every day after that is just one more number, one more integer. So like if it starts at 1, the next day will be 2. But in between, you have hours and minutes and seconds. And it could still handle that because it just makes, one day, instead of adding just one integer, you would add a fraction of a day, like if you add 0.5, you would get 12 hours. So and I'll show you that here. Let's see, date add. So well, what I'm going to do is go through all these functions in other videos. So what I really want to show you here is that this insert function wizard allows you to search for things like we just saw. If you're curious, you can search for stuff, but what's more frequently used is this drop-down list, because here's all the categories. So if you want to do something like that deals with math, click on this math and trig category, and here you could see this returns this ABS function, abs. That's the name of the function. It has a parameter or an argument called number, and not called number. You pass in a number, and it'll return the absolute value of a number without its sign. So let's try that. Let's go down here and let's type in abs. So we'll do equals ABS, and I'll put in a negative number, 900, and then I'm going to close the parentheses and hit enter. And now instead of it being negative 900, the abs function, it returns the positive value of that number. And that's the abs function. So you could see that you could just start playing around with these functions. They'll tell you what the input is needed. So in this case, a number is needed as input. And in all these cases, numbers are needed for the math functions. Notice again that you could reference a cell. So you could reference this cell here, and you would get 34. If I put a negative number in this cell, then you get the positive value of whatever that number is. Let's try to put a range in here though. Okay, so let's see if this works. it doesn't give you an error, but it only takes the first number, right? So, sometimes Microsoft Excel is smart enough. Even if you put in the wrong parameter, it'll take the first number. So you got to be careful with the functions, because if it asks for a number, one number, then it's only going to give you the absolute value of that number. Okay. So I just want to show you that sometimes it won't cause an error, but you'll still be wrong with your parameters. So parameters are important. Okay, so let's go back to this, and if we click on a blank cell again, you could search over all these categories. And remember, all these categories, they contain a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, look at all these functions. Here's all the functions in this financial category, and just a ton of functions, and all of them, look at, like, this one has a ton of parameters. You got to put in an interest rate, a period, a number of periods, a present value, a future value, and a type. Now, how do I know that? Well, it's because I've seen this function before. But if you haven't, and here's a big help here, look at this, help on this function. You want to click this link. So this is a huge help, this wizard. If you click help this link on any function you select, let's click it, it's going to take you to a Microsoft website. Is it taking me there? It takes you to a Microsoft website. I'm sorry that took so long, but let's expand this a little. So what we did is we clicked this help on this function, because we have, I knew what these parameters were, but you had no idea. The description says it returns the interest payment for a given period for an investment based on periodic constant payments and a constant interest rate. But you might have no idea what this means with all these parameters. So you want to click help on this function. It'll take you to the Microsoft Office website, and it gives you the name of the function again, and it says this article describes the formula, syntax, and usage of the IPMT function in Microsoft Excel. And it says the description, the same thing that we saw in the wizard, and the syntax. They call it syntax because it's describing, how the function is, what the description is with the name and all the parameters. That's called the syntax. And then it says the IPMT function has the following arguments. And here is where you find everything you need to know about the function. This rate parameter, it says the IPMT function has the following arguments. The rate is required. It's the interest rate for the period. The per is the number of periods, is the period for which you want to find the interest, and must be range 1 to n per. N per is the total number of payments. So it has everything, right? But not only does it have all the descriptions, and you could read all this, it tells you sometimes, here's one point. Parameters are sometimes required, but sometimes they're optional. Like down here, this FV, it says optional here. That means you don't need to pass in something for this FV, the future value. If we scroll down a little bit, it even does more than that. Look at this. It gives you an example on the website. It says, what do I need to do? What do I need? Show me how to use this. And it gives you an example. Like, here's a sample worksheet with data in this column and a description of that data. So here's an interest rate in this row 2. Here's a period for which you want to find the interest. Here's the years of the loan. Here's the present value. And here's the formula. Notice that it has 4 parameters, right? A2, 3, A4, and 5. If you scroll up, you notice that there's more than 4 parameters up here. There's these 2. There's 2 more. There's actually 6. But because they're optional down here, notice the brackets around here. These two last parameters have brackets around them, and that's because they're optional. So that's trying to indicate that they're optional, so that when we scroll down and look at the example, there's only 4 parameters because it's not including those 2 other parameters. So we don't need to know, we don't need to get into this function particularly, but it's a great example of what Microsoft Excel provides to you. They provide you a website that describes every single function and has a description and shows you the syntax and describes all the parameters, whether they're required or not. It gives you some remarks, it gives you some notes and pointers on how to use the function. And it also gives you an example, a real world example, where you can look at how it's used in the real world. So you could just copy this data, take it to a spreadsheet, and you could get the right answer, and you could understand it. So I'm going to close this website, and remember, you click on help on this function. How do we get there again? You click on FX, and then you select a category, any category that you're interested in. If I click on text, and if I click on concatenate, it has parameters text1, text2, and the description says join several text strings into one text. Now if I don't know what that means, I could go to help on this function, and it will take me to a website that has a description of the function. Here it says it joins up to 255 text strings, and they can be numbers, cell references, combinations. And here's the syntax again. It tells you the name of the function and the parameters you need. And then if you keep scrolling down, look at it gives you tons of examples here. It says example, and here's a formula, a description, a live result. I mean, it gives you tons of examples. Okay? So do not be afraid of functions. Do not think that they're difficult, because Microsoft Excel provides you with a website and a web page for every single description, all 300 of them. If you click on any one of them, you're going to see the name, the description, and if you click on this link, it'll take you to a page that will tell you everything you need to know about any function. And remember to change categories, scroll through these categories, and you can find out everything you need to know about any function. So that's my introduction to functions. What are the things you need to know again? You need to know that you need an equal sign, and you need to know that every function has a name. Every function is called when you hit enter, and every function needs a open parentheses and a closed parentheses. And if there are parameters or arguments that you need to provide them in between the parentheses. And you also need to know that this FX is a great button, because when you click it, it tells you everything you need to know about all the functions in every single category. It gives you the names, the description, and a web page down here that you could click on and go to. If you want to search for a function, you could search for it here. So that's my introduction to functions. Now comes a question. So how should you learn Microsoft Excel and all those functions? Well, you could click on this button, and you could click on a category, and then you could click on a function like date, and you could go to the web page here, and you could look at what the function does and read all this stuff. If you want to, you can read all of it. But what we're going to do at excelvbasql.com is we are going to do all the heavy lifting for you. So what we're going to do is do this. We have a worksheet here. It's called random data, and it has a bunch of data in it. Let's see how many rows. It has 100 rows down here. So I have 100 rows of data, and the data contains names, street addresses, cities, state, zip codes, countries, emails, phone numbers, dates, descriptions, that contains some Latin text just for some dummy text. It contains salaries of these people. It contains their favorite color. It contains the number of kids. It contains the department that they work, what department do they work in, and it contains their employer. So this is just dummy data that contains information about people, their address, city, state, who they work for, favorite color, marital status, salary. Okay, so what we're going to do at excelvbasequel.com, instead of you worrying about, okay, how do I find all these functions and what they mean and how to use them, and copying and pasting stuff, going to the Microsoft website and doing all that, you don't need to do that. There's 350 functions. You're not going to use all 350. We're going to make videos for the most frequently used ones that will probably cover, 90%, 95% of what you're going to use in Excel. And why do I say that? Because I've used Excel for a long time. Everyone on our staff has used it for a long time. We know what's important. A lot of those functions are very specific to particular industries, and they're not used too frequently. So we're going to put up videos on the most frequently used functions, and we're going to show you how to use them with real data like you would in real life, like with data like this, just like this. We're going to use this data that has all this information. Okay, and to start that off, just to give a brief start to that, we'll do a couple things here with functions. And I'm just going to show you 3 functions real quick as part of this introduction video to get started with that. So let's say you have this data and your boss says, how much money are these people making? Sum up the salaries for the company for this data. So to do that, I'm going to insert a row. I'm going to highlight row 1, right click and go down to insert, and now I have another row up here. And I could just use the sum function to do equals sum, open parentheses, and then I could scroll down from K3. I don't need to scroll down. I could just do K3 colon 1000 because I know there's only 100 rows. So I'll put in a range of cells that goes from K3 to K1000, and this will cover all the salaries that are in this data. And I'll hit enter, and the total number of the total sum of salaries is 27,670,201. So this is how you would use the sum function in the real world. Okay, so what if your boss also asks, I'm worried about the description that people wrote here. I'm worried that people didn't write enough, and maybe I need to know how long this description is that people wrote. Okay, so what you can do is insert a column and highlight the column next to I'll highlight the column next to description. I'll go insert. Now I have a new column, and I'll put in a length of description. Okay, so your boss is worried that people didn't write enough, and he wants to know the length of these descriptions. So I'm just going to do equals, and now I know that there's a function called len, L-E-N, that if you pass in some text, and here's my text, I'm referencing J3, and I close the parentheses. If I hit enter, this description is 64 characters long. So let's say your boss is worried about the length of the description. Well, now you know how many characters the length of the description is. And to get the length for all these descriptions, all you have to do is just double click this little square in the corner, and it's gonna autofill. That's called autofilling all the formulas down. So using autofill is really easy and really powerful because it takes this formula, length of J3, and it applies it to whatever's next. It applies it to all the cells below. going all the way down to the last one. So here you could see, for instance, length of cell J93 of all this text is 126 characters. So now if your boss asks, like, well, what's the length of, Gannon Floyd's description, you could just go over and you could go, well, it's 110 characters. One thing I should note about that autofill functionality is that there needs to be data in the column that you're autofilling in. So let me clear this out and I'll show you something that might catch you up. I'm going to highlight that and put the clear contents. So if let's say there's no data in here. If I do autofill, oh, actually it does. Okay. I thought the autofill would stop right here. I thought it would stop right there because there's no data here. But let me try if there's no data here. Let me clear this out. I just want to show that this might be okay. So it doesn't matter. I thought there needed to be data on both sides. I believe I encountered that in a previous version of Microsoft Excel, but maybe they fixed it. So okay, so no big deal. Okay, so now we use the function here called length, and just if you're curious, you could get more information by clicking on the FX button, and it tells you that it returns a number of characters in a text string, and text is the text whose length you want to find. Spaces count as characters, so it's counting spaces as characters, and the formula result here is 64. So that is just an introduction to what I'm going to be doing in the following bunch of videos. In the next round of videos, what I'm going to do is actually go to these categories, and I'm going to break up my videos into categories, and I'm going to make a category for lookup and reference functions, and a category for text functions, and a category for all these different a category for all these different categories. So on my website, in the Excel area, you'll see a bunch of different, you'll see lesson 3, 4, and 5 will be different categories, like the math functions, the text functions, the logical functions, all the different functions that you saw here, all the different function categories. I'll put that on the website so that you could go to the website and see, let's say, the statistical functions that are used most often with real-world examples that use data like this. And we'll get real detailed, and I'll show you real-world examples that really will help you learn very quickly what Microsoft Excel can do and all kinds of stuff. So for instance, let me ask you a question. What if your boss said, tell me anyone who wrote less than 20 characters in their description? Can you do that real quickly? If you can't do that quickly, then you want to watch the videos that I'm going to be putting up, because using this data, I'll teach you how to do all kinds of stuff in Microsoft Excel. So that's it for this video. This was just an introduction. I'm going to put up a ton of more videos on all these functions using real-world data just like this. So as a reminder, go to excelvbasql.com. It's where you can watch all the videos, over almost 25 hours of video. Put your email in here and we'll email you when those videos go up, and you can contact us here. And once again, it's a resource that'll teach you everything you need to know about Excel, from the very beginning stuff, if you've never touched Excel before, all the way up to the super advanced stuff where you're doing programming and automating all kinds of stuff. So that's it for this video. Keep watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.